Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief of the Central Air Command, and TCA Raghavan is a former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Ambassador Raghavan, let me start with you now. Pakistan has consistently used terrorism as a tool, a strategic tool in a sense, against India. And despite global warnings to the contrary, why are certain members of the of the global community still asking India for restraint when India has acted in a measured way?
I think countries see different regional situations in terms of their own national interests. They won't. So those countries which call for restraint or which make statements on those lines are seeing the current situation in terms of their own interests and their own perspective. The fact is, we have to deal with a very, very recalcitrant neighbor and take measures such as are necessary to prevent further attacks of the kind which took place in Pahalgam and to provide security to our own citizens. That is the elementary and most fundamental task of any government. So quite regardless of what individual members of foreign countries may say, every country has to act in its own interest as it sees it. And therefore, that some response was required, or that a cocktail of responses was required, including diplomatic, political, and also kinetic steps,
right,
was therefore essential in the current circumstances.
Air Marshal Sinha, does Pakistan's failure, to dismantle the terror infrastructure warrant a more strong, a more serious response than India has already given in terms of military response? What would you say?
First of all, I would like to, for the successful conduct of Operation Sindoor, I would like to compliment the Prime Minister, the Defence Minister and the Indian Armed Forces for a very precise and decisive attack on 9 of the terror training camps, including their headquarters. It is a great achievement, and it has created a sense of happiness among people who were very disturbed by this dastardly act of killing 26 innocent people. Now, as far as Pakistan is concerned, it is the ideology of the Pakistan army to propagate terror into India. And it is unlikely that this ideology is going to change. Earlier, we were targeting a specific camp during the surgical strike and the Balakot airstrike. But this time, we have taken the entire terror organization of Pakistan. And I'm sure that Pakistan is unlikely to react this time because they're facing tremendous internal crisis. Their economy is down. They have sold their war reserve weapons to Ukraine to earn some money. There is secessionist movements in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Sindh and Punjab are fighting with each other. So Pakistan is not in a position to retaliate immediately. But this terror activity is likely to continue. It will remain suppressed for some time, like it happened after the Pahalgam incident. But what is required is that now India needs to be focused. Every time Pakistan tries something, we have to ensure that the penalty is very, very severe. Something that needs to wake them up and make them refrain from thinking another action. So this is very important. Our response has to be very, very extreme. We cannot let them pass away by doing some small acts of 1 or 2 terrorist attacks. We should retaliate heavily.
Okay. We are also joined by Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, retired strategic and security affairs expert. Thank you very much, General Hasnain, for being with us. Now, given that Air Marshal Sinha says that our response should be stronger, how, in a military response, how precise have we been so far in our strikes to avoid civilian and military casualties? Or escalation, actually?
The mark We started with the surgical strikes in 2016, ratcheted it up to 2019 with the Balakot strike, that's the Jabba Top strike. We didn't have the necessary precision technologies at that time. And now we have gone to the next higher level, in fact, the next to next higher level, and also decided to go for multiple targets at the same time, which is 9 targets along a front of approximately 700 kilometers. I think this is a fairly high calibration that we have achieved. And what the government was doing, essentially, the Indian government and the Indian armed forces, is still moving from a level of messaging which was done in the surgical strikes and the Balakot strike to now a level of strategic deterrence. I think somewhere in the Indian government and the Indian armed forces system, they must have decided as to what is the required calibration which will ensure that this does not spiral out into something which is conventional and uncontrollable. So I think an element of caution is always kept in this. And at the same time, the question is, can the objectives be achieved?
Okay.
I would say yes, in this case, the objectives have been achieved to a very great extent. Strategic deterrence along with strategic messaging has been sent out adequately to Pakistan. I would also look at it from a different angle if I can explain. We have hit 3 locations in the center of gravity of Pakistan: Bahawalpur, Muridke, and Sialkot.
Right.
These are the locations also of some of the strategic elements of the Pakistan armed forces. The message should be clear: if we can hit with precision a terrorist camp, a terrorist facility, holding facility, headquarter, or anything of that kind, then we are definitely capable of taking out any Pakistan military capability too. That's the strategic message going out, and that is the deterrence angle here. I think that should be very clear to the people there. And we will see now when the response comes from Pakistan, how far will this response go? That will give us the idea of how effective was our decision making in terms of the quantum of objectives chosen and the delivery of munitions that we decided at that particular time. To my mind, Pakistan does not have the capability to pursue a conventional war. It doesn't have the economy. It doesn't have the resources today. 3 to 5 days is all about this. They can fight, but they've got one weapon in their quiver, and that is the weapon of irrationality. A decision taken against the run of play, and that is something no one can determine or work against.
Indeed. And Ambassador Raghavan, why is Operation Sindoor in line with international law and also in line with counter-terrorism operations worldwide?
Self-defense is a part of the sovereign right of any country. So when you are facing major terrorist attacks and there is a clear finger of suspicion pointing to the direction of those attacks and the source of those attacks, any government has the right to respond and to take counter-terrorism measures. So that goes without saying. It's well established in terms of practices internationally for many years. Now.
Air Marshal Sinha, does Pakistan's repeated failure to act against terrorists, reduce its global credibility, and also this nuclear brinkmanship? Is it being used as a shield, in fact, to try and support terror groups on its soil? Under the guise of being a nuclear state.
Pakistan's credibility has always been low. It has been in the grey list of FATF for such a long period, and it might go back again. As far as the nuclear brinkmanship is concerned, Pakistan is fully aware that India is also a nuclear power, and our nuclear doctrine talks of no first use. But if Pakistan decides to use nuclear weapon, then the retaliation will be so severe, and the loser will be Pakistan. So this nuclear rattling is just kind of hollow threat that they keep giving. It does not make sense because whatever they do, they are going to receive much more than what they try to do against India. So it will be foolish on their part to try and get into the nuclear domain. Conventional, yes, they can try something, but the effect will be very, very limited because they do not have the wherewithal now to continue with conventional warfare for a long time, more than 3 to 4 days.
General Hasnain, how have the past attacks, we had a report on the past attacks. I mean, some of them, we left out quite a few actually. There were many more attacks from Pakistan, terror attacks. I mean, the big attacks like 26/11, Pulwama, how have these shaped our response towards cross-border terrorism?
See, Mark, over a period of time, of course, we have been able to reduce the overall footprint of terror inside the Kashmir Valley. I can tell you, for example, I was 25 years ago a colonel at the Avantipur Victor Force headquarters of the Rashtra Rifles. And I distinctly remember on a single day, I would be handling up to 12 to 14 engagements going on the ground just in South Kashmir. Today, if there is one engagement in the better part of 2 months, is considered to be something great. So we have actually controlled it to a very great extent. The strength was 3,000 to 3,500 terrorists at one time. With the construction of the LC fence, the mathematics of terror went into our favor and we started killing, eliminating far more than the number which could infiltrate or get recruited. And that upset the whole chain. From 2001 onwards till 2019-20, the strength finally came down to 100 to 130 terrorists. That itself is a huge achievement. But at the end of the day, 100 to 130 terrorists, to eliminate that will take an entire army and you may not be able to do it. So that is what we have to work against, to make sure that this small strength of terrorists, no more infiltration, no more surge, nothing like this should take place anywhere. And an attack such as the one in Pahalgam, it is completely against the run of play.
Yes.
We have to ensure a higher grade of intelligence and readiness for it so that none of this can happen in the future. Otherwise, we have had huge attacks in the past and with very high strength of terrorists in the valley at that time to support it. But today to have a big attack is actually, in a way, we have to make sure that with the kind of strength which is available to the terrorists in the valley, that must not be allowed to happen.
Ambassador Raghavan, has India, exhausted all diplomatic options before using military force, or are diplomatic options always, something that is available, and really they complement the military action as well?
What we have, I think, the present kinetic measures which have been taken have to be seen as part of a larger cocktail.
Right.
And very significant diplomatic sanctions were announced earlier. And perhaps in times to come, we will also come to the conclusion that the strategic impact of those diplomatic measures announced, and especially with regard to the Indus Waters Treaty, is much more weighty than any tactical or kinetic steps you take. But having said that, I do think that a cocktail was required and a cocktail has been delivered. But we must remember we are at the early state of this crisis. As was mentioned, we have to see what happens next. And in that context, diplomacy and a political negotiation is always the preferred and the final outcome of any crisis situation. As the Prime Minister had said in another context, we are not living in an era of war. And that applies equally to South Asia and to our own neighborhood. So we should never foreclose the diplomacy option because in the end, that is going to be the most effective way of moving forward and addressing this crisis.
I beg your pardon, Air Marshal Sinha, You know, Pakistan is obviously going through some economic crisis. There's a lot of political instability in Pakistan as well. The military-backed institutions continue to hold sway. Has this really been the big problem that Pakistan has? And it really hasn't, as a country, been able to get over its instability, and it's unlikely to because of the nature of its governance.
True. Pakistan has always had sectarian violence because there has never been peace. One sect has been fighting with another sect. The minorities have been almost eliminated out there. And if you see what is happening today, Balochistan is carrying on a very strong secessionist movement. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is in fire. The Sindh and Punjab province are fighting with each other with respect to some creation of canals on the Sindh River. And now with reduced water, there will be more problems. So Pakistan has got its own serious internal issues. But the basic ideology on which Pakistan was created, that they are different from India, does not hold good, because if that was the right ideology, then Bangladesh should have never separated from Pakistan.
Right.
And neither would all these segments like Balochistan and all wanting to separate out. So the ideology which is being pursued primarily because the army is in power, and it is the army ideology which is flowing from the madrasas and the masjids, which is not what the Pakistanis wanted, but they have no control over it. The political powers have no say in this. And recently the army chief of Pakistan made it very clear as to what Pakistan's ideology is and what should be taught to the young generation for next 3-4 generations, so that it does not fade away from that thought process. So this is
Right.
what Pakistan is all about.
Gentlemen, stay with us as we play out this next story, which is largely about the propaganda and psychological war that's also been started. Now, India's enemies remain relentless, whether along the borders or in cyberspace, but the nation stands prepared. The Indian government is acting with resolve, fortifying our defense, not just with weapons, but with the truth. You know, from exposing misinformation to dismantling Pakistan-backed propaganda networks, every step is aimed at safeguarding citizens from psychological warfare. DD India's Rahul Upadhyay reports.
The enemies of India are never at rest. Whether it's the borders or digital space, the rogue elements are always at mischief on multiple fronts. But India is ready. The government has taken decisive action, strengthening its defenses not just on the ground but in cyberspace. The Indian government's fact-check unit under the Press Information Bureau has ramped up its efforts to debunk false narratives being circulated online. As the Indian armed forces struck terror camps in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir on Wednesday, a parallel war unfolded on social media, with fake videos, misleading images, and unverified claims flooding platforms like X and Facebook. The fact-check unit has issued clarifications on its social media platforms addressing misinformation related to the April 22 terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir's Pahalgam that killed 26 people. What started as a focused and effective military operation by the Indian Armed Forces has now spiraled into a chaotic online propaganda war. Pro-Pakistan social media handles and even influential political figures are deliberately spreading fake news, fabricating stories of miraculous military victories and heroic retaliation that simply do not exist. Their goal is clear: to flood the information space with falsehoods so quickly and overwhelmingly that it becomes difficult to separate fact from fiction. This goes beyond mere misinformation. It's a deliberate, orchestrated effort to warp reality, mislead the masses, and shape public perception to serve a specific agenda. In a blatant effort to hijack the narrative and distract from the reality on the ground, Pakistan's state-affiliated accounts have turned to their familiar playbook, recycling outdated images, misrepresenting old videos, and inventing completely fabricated claims. However, the Indian government has taken decisive steps to combat misinformation by banning several Pakistani social media platforms known for spreading false narratives. But new mischievous ones keep cropping up every now and then. Rahul Upadhyay's report, DD India.
And in fact, post the surgical strike on terror hubs in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, full-scale civil defense mock drills were also held across the country on Wednesday to assess India's preparedness for emergency response. The drills aimed at sensitizing and mobilizing civilians in case of an emergency, and they were carried out across major cities including Delhi, Mumbai, Pune, Bengaluru, Lucknow, Gwalior, Patna, and also in states of the northeast. Now, these measures included a provision of a crash blackout session, or many sessions in fact, and provisions for early camouflaging of vital installations and the updation of evacuation plan and rehearsal. In Delhi, in fact, a thorough mock drill was conducted at the the New Delhi Municipal Corporation Council, New Delhi Municipal Council, I beg your pardon, NDMC, and that was at their office and at the bustling Khan market, simulating emergency situations. As part of the mock drill, multiple states and cities such as Delhi, Mumbai, Punjab, Gwalior, Patna witnessed power blackouts for around 10 to 15 minutes on Wednesday. And during these blackouts, power supply was cut to shield areas against enemy attack. Let's turn once again to our guests. General Hasnain, are biased news reports influencing global diplomatic reactions to this operation?
See, Mark, mostly the legitimacy and reputation of Pakistani handles are well known around the world. But having said that, I'll say that the ISPR, the Inter-Services Public Relations Wing of the Pakistan Armed Forces, is a past master at this and has been at it very long. Most people in India will not know this, but the ISPR was set up in 1948. It predates the ISI by many years. And it means that Pakistan, as a smaller nation compared to India, understood the importance of information, psychological warfare and information warfare very early in its existence. And therefore, the ISPR has been dishing out all kinds of propaganda against India around the world. I can tell you this, that if you go to various countries around the world where you would not even expect Pakistanis to be present, you may find them there sitting with you on a breakfast table, like I found in Israel during the Herzliya summit, where I found that Pakistan, with no diplomatic relations with Israel, was still represented at the Herzliya summit. And I found more Pakistanis in the Tel Aviv University than Indians. So this kind of a thing does cut ice somewhere or the other, and people do tend to sort of give them credibility. Now, I'm getting questions from lots and lots of friends in Canada and the United States, those who served with me in the United Nations, asking me about questions about all this information which is being dished out by Pakistan at the moment. And I, as a single man from my side, I'm sure many others are doing it, I am attempting to neutralize all this fake information which is being put out. But much of it is going across. Right. And probably some people in these countries are believing this also, from a credibility angle.
Indeed, and Ambassador Raghavan, is the Indian government effectively countering this disinformation through fact-checking, or is, a lot more required in terms of, let's say, the entire media has to go about doing this fact-checking, not only the government to that extent?
Well, there's always scope for doing more and doing a better job. Sometimes the shrillness of our private media in countering disinformation, their shrillness can be also counterproductive. But while I don't want to sound complacent, in my own view, Pakistan's own reputation is so poor, and the reputational damage it has suffered on the terrorism question for the past decade and a half is so severe that in my reading at least, these disinformation campaigns do not have much of an impact. I think on the whole, whether they say it or not, most countries recognize the grave provocations that India has been subjected to by a most recalcitrant neighbor, and recognize the fact that the government has to inevitably take steps of a counter-terrorism nature to safeguard its interests and to safeguard its citizens. So while these social media campaigns and these disinformation campaigns, while a great deal of effort is put into them by the ISPR and by other agencies in Pakistan, to my mind, the output from this is relatively limited because of the poor reputation which Pakistan has accumulated over the past decade and a half, 2 decades.
Air Marshal Sinha, how would you view this, because there are certain foreign media also which seem to be sympathetic to Pakistan in some way. They portray Pakistan as a victim. To what extent should the government of India or actually the Indian media counter this because it's clear propaganda?
Whenever fake news comes, there are agencies within India which are countering it. But there are a lot of contradictions within the fake news itself. If you see, the ISPR has claimed 5 fighters and 1 UAV. Immediately after that, the Defense Minister of Pakistan says that none of the Indian aircraft violated the Pakistani airspace. They all fired weapons from the Indian side. So if no aircraft entered Pakistan, how did they shoot them? Their weapons are not at the border or at the LC. So there is a lot of contradiction amongst this. But what happens is that the social media generally affects youngsters who tend to read something and tend to believe it.
Yes.
But they are not in the decision-making cycle. So when you interact with youngsters, they will have a different viewpoint. And it will be divided depending on how many are subjected to fake news and how many are subjected to real news. It is, none of them are looking for truth. They just, gobble up whatever comes their way because they're running short of time, traveling from office to work, office to home and vice versa. That is the time they're catching up on all these issues. But when it comes to decision making amongst nations, then like the earlier speakers had mentioned, that Pakistan does not have much credibility.
Okay.
So the moment you have that Pakistani tag to a message, it will not carry that kind of weightage amongst the government circles and the decision making circles.
I will leave it there. Thank you very much, General Atta Hasnain, Air Marshal Sinha, and Ambassador TCA Raghavan. Thank you very much for putting this Operation Sindoor into the right perspective and giving us a clear idea about India's goals and the precision with which these strikes were carried out and the objectives that were achieved.